What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We have another awesome Switch 2 video today to discuss a lot of interesting things about comparisons to Steam Deck, Xbox Series S, PS4, and of course, Switch 2. In this discussion, first of all, shout outs to Rudy here on X, who gave me the idea for this video because of this information he sent me. But something very interesting was discovered here that I actually forgot about with Digital Foundry from what they covered a couple years ago with the Steam Deck and Xbox Series S. So just to give you a quick little refresher here, it's going to make a lot of sense when you see this versus the other video we're going to show you. And then you're going to see the big disconnect as to where we are now with this site, Digital Foundry, the big professionals basically putting all their information out there for the world to see and news sites to report. We're going to see the big disconnect here. So take a look at this really quick.
Very different market segments. The Steam Deck has been commercially successful, but I think it sold something like 3 to 4 million units. You'd expect the Switch 2 to be like going up into the 100 million plus. So, very different markets. However, from a technological perspective, I think the question is quite sound. Oliver,
Steam Deck versus Switch 2. They're going to give their opinion here.
Be curious as to your thoughts on this one before Alex and I weigh in.
I suspect, based off of my experiences with Steam Deck, that in docked play, it should be faster than a Steam Deck. I suspect that will be the case in most titles. It should be substantially faster in similar workloads.
Substantially faster than a Steam Deck. He then had some concerns about portable play, but of course they don't know. As we know. We know they don't know. But they suspected Switch 2, of course, from what was already being shown, was substantially more powerful than Steam Deck, even according to Digital Foundry in docked play. Okay? Now let's take a look at this really quick.
Okay, so obviously we've been taking a look at the Switch 2
just real briefly
reveal stream in considerable depth, and Oliver's done the legwork here. We've got a range of comparisons here, comparisons with the PS4, which I think is a natural comparison, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously, the generational leap versus Switch 1. And we've also got some further impressions on third-party games. Let's kick off, Oliver, by talking about your PlayStation 4 comparisons, because, fascinating stuff, right?
Yeah, I think this is actually the most natural point of comparison. You'd think the Switch 1 would be, but I actually think the PS4 seems like a very natural point of comparison for the Switch 2. And that becomes especially...
Okay, very natural point of comparison to Switch 2 is PS4. Yeah, we've been down this road. Like, why are they doing that? Didn't make any sense from what we were seeing on screen. And then we go take a look. And this is Oliver, by the way. He was a Nintendo enthusiast, self-admittedly, right? He's owned lots of Nintendo consoles, been a Nintendo supporter. Nothing against him, but he works for a company and he could be getting directives to cover certain types of content that may not be his first choice. And Oliver did this video in 2022, I think June of 2022 or so, talking about the Steam Deck versus Xbox Series S. Now, again, this may not be his real opinion. I don't know, but it's extremely the opposite kind of information here for Steam Deck versus Switch 2 versus Steam Deck versus Xbox Series S versus Switch 2 versus PS4. For some reason here, they are saying in this video that the Steam Deck is pretty much going to give you Xbox Series S-like performance. I kid you not. Watch.
The Steam Deck, Apple's new portable hardware, is a seriously impressive piece of kit. With its powerful AMD Van Gogh APU, the Steam Deck is capable of running most modern games at good performance levels, often equaling or exceeding last-gen console systems. But last-gen performance is becoming a less and less relevant benchmark. With demanding
they're saying last-gen performance is becoming a less important benchmark to judge games and hardware these days. And this is about the Steam Deck.
software on the horizon, and last-gen systems finally starting to fall by the wayside, the Xbox Series S is establishing itself as the baseline for modern titles. This is the console that developers will have to work around to ship new games. Even the most demanding cross-platform titles will have to find a home on Microsoft's tiny console. So here's the question: can we push the Steam Deck to equal the performance and quality settings in Xbox Series S games? Matching Series S performance on the Steam Deck is a challenge for sure, but if we can get there, perhaps.
Keep in mind, they never even brought up the PS4 here for comparison's sakes with Steam Deck. They went right away to the Xbox Series S, and this was back in 2022, and this is for the Steam Deck, which is factually less powerful than the Switch 2. And the Switch 2, they're doing comparisons to PS4 in 2025 for a more powerful machine than the Steam Deck. You can't make this up.
Perhaps the deck can deliver acceptable results in future titles. Looking at this spec sheet, the two systems aren't as far apart as you may think. Both machines are based around the same AMD technologies, Zen 2 CPUs paired with RDNA 2 GPUs. The Steam Deck is substantially pared back relative to its.
Yeah, so we know for the Switch 2, the memory bandwidth is faster than Steam Deck. It has faster LPDDR5X memory and about 120 gigabytes per second. 12 gigabytes, but not 16 gigabytes, but it is faster memory. Yes, the CPU technically is better in the Steam Deck, even though it's only 4 cores. Zen x86 architecture is better than ARM for gaming. But when you look at the GPU is nowhere near as good as the Switch 2's GPU. How teraflops should measure just don't really add up. They're completely different, how they're measured. They even talked about recently how the latest ROG Ally, I think, or Legion Go, it has like an 8 teraflop APU basically. It has a GPU and CPU on the same die. It's like rated at 8 teraflops and doesn't even come anywhere close to the performance of an Xbox Series S. Not close, but it does decently, right? And it's better than Steam Deck, but the actual performance gap on screen in actual performance is much, much less than what the numbers say. So teraflops don't tell the whole story, and that's what they were kind of saying here with this comparison of Steam Deck versus Xbox Series S, is that, they're really not that far apart from each other, even though they kind of are. It's like has more than double the CUs. It has 2.5 more CUs, compute units, than the Steam Deck does, has double the cores for its Zen 2 CPU. The memory is faster, but the memory issues with this console, Xbox Series S, this is what really bogs it down. Right? This is just basically not enough for developers to work with. So this is really interesting. They're trying to say, though, that the Steam Deck is going to give you Xbox Series S performance or close to it, and they're completely not even talking about PS4.
Stronger console cousin, but critically it's targeting a much lower output resolution. The Series S is typically aiming for resolutions in the 1080p to 1440p range, while the Steam Deck is limited to just 1280 by 800 on its display, or 720p with 40 pixel black bars above and below the image. So the fact the Steam Deck is theoretically less than half as powerful in GPU compute and RAM bandwidth isn't a huge issue here. A 7-inch screen with essentially a 720p resolution is a forgiving canvas for game content relative to a large format 4K television. Cutting resolution alone may be enough to...
Yeah, so a console that's less than half as performant as an Xbox Series S is not that big of a deal, they're saying, and it's going to get the same games. It's gonna look pretty darn good, is what he's. That's a lot of glazing here of the Steam Deck, right?
To give us the slack we need to equal the current gen consoles. We're going to take a look at a range of demanding current gen software on both machines.
Look at Cyberpunk here. That's the main game we're gonna be covering, right? So we might as well look at Cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk 2077 is a demanding title, infamously thrashing the last-gen consoles with heavy CPU and storage loads. But current-gen consoles, even the Series S, managed to acquit themselves quite well and turn out a good-looking and stable rendition of Night City. On Steam Deck, there are essentially two paths to take here. The first path is to push settings more in line with the Series S, which seems close to the PC's high preset. Helpfully,
Okay, so Xbox Series S seems to be running the high preset. In my comparison videos, in my last Cyberpunk 2077 video on Switch 2 and PC, I set the PC version to high, and it did look like pretty much a match for what the Switch 2 version was showing on screen from in that comparison, at least in that area. I couldn't tell the difference. So it might be a range between medium and high settings for the Switch 2 version of Cyberpunk. And the Steam Deck preset is, in fact, basically that. It's like a mixture of medium and high with some very specific things are set to low that you won't even tell.
Cyberpunk includes a pre-balanced Steam Deck preset, which in practice is a mix of medium and high settings, which do actually seem like a reasonably close match for the S. Bumping the ambient occlusion setting to medium fills in the only glaring settings deficit. Unfortunately, the price we pay here is resolution. Here, Cyberpunk is running with FSR 1.0 quality enabled at a 720p output, meaning an internal resolution of approximately 854 by 480. Even on the Steam Deck's small screen, Cyberpunk is lacking clarity, especially on distant objects. The FSR does an okay job.
Yeah, which is something that this will be fixed with the DLSS on Switch 2. The DLSS in Switch 2 is bleeding edge, next level, the best you're going to get right now. I kid you not. It's incredibly good. That's from my own eyes. That's just, I understand, guys. That's my opinion. I'm pushing my opinion on you here. If you disagree with me, though, let me know. But from what I could see, from what I showed, it looks like the best DLSS I've ever seen. And I got an RTX 5090 9800X 3D PC, bleeding edge PC. I got the best stuff around to actually see what looks the best. So in my opinion, I think Switch 2 does have probably the best version of DLSS there is right now. I don't have any information or facts from Nintendo, but from what I can visually see, it looks absolutely amazing. That's a huge advantage over Steam Deck right off the bat, and they're still giving it a pass here versus Xbox Series S.
Edges,
pretty much,
although in-surface detail and fine geometry don't hold up to any sort of scrutiny. The second path is to take those optimized Steam Deck settings and make some additional strategic settings compromises to achieve better image quality. Dialing down volumetrics, shadows, and a few other settings allows us to bump image quality all the way to a full 720p. Cyberpunk looks so much cleaner as a result, and the primary visual concession seems to be more obvious shadow draw-in, which isn't terrible.
So they removed FSR, which looks terrible, by the way, and made it a native 720p on Steam Deck with low to medium settings, and it looks pretty good, honestly. But is that actually an Xbox Series S experience here? They're kind of saying it is, right? But this is actually more like a PS4 experience when you dial it down that low, right?
Very noticeable during typical play. Both approaches yield a consistent 30 FPS when paired with SteamOS's frame rate limiter. Open world driving can provoke a late frame or two at times, but generally we are locked to 30, even during more intense moments. These are extremely impressive results, to be clear. This is Cyberpunk on a handheld, at good settings and with solid frame rates. Really excellent stuff. Next up is Control, Remedy's moody technical showpiece.
They went to Control,
Series S
racing games.
900p
They showed some other games that struggled more, like Guardians of the Galaxy and Dirt 5.
Settings that mostly correspond
How
to
close
low
can Steam Deck
preset
get to
on
Series
PC.
S?
The trade-off for those settings concessions is a relatively smooth 60 FPS update.
Let's see what his conclusions are
most pronounced. In contemporary games, the Steam Deck can achieve a performance profile remarkably similar to the Series S. The deck needs to be pushed right to the edge to get there, with suitably poor battery life, but the results are seriously impressive. Looking ahead, the outlook is a little bit more cloudy, as certain hardware shortcomings are bound to become more obvious over time. But when the Steam Deck is firing on all cylinders, it can absolutely achieve the portable Series S dream.
Wow. they legit tried to get these games to look and run as good as an Xbox Series S, and they even said in this video that basically the Steam Deck can give you Xbox Series S performance on the go, and it was very amazing, you know, for what it was doing. And don't get me wrong, it legit is an amazing device. Back in 2022 when it came out, this was amazing. No one ever saw something like this before. So I don't know if there was a bit of some, you know, rose tinted glasses here with this, you know, analysis, but they had to dial down settings here to basically PlayStation 4 or below levels to get the games running and looking, you know, good enough or clear enough to run on Steam Deck. And they still called that an Xbox Series S type of experience, which goes back to what we're talking about here. Why are they saying the Switch 2 is more powerful than the Steam Deck?
I suspect, based off of my experiences with Steam Deck, that in docked play, it should be faster than a Steam Deck. I suspect that will be the case in most titles. It should be substantially faster in similar workloads.
Yeah, and then you go on to this here.
Right.
Yeah, I think this is actually the most natural point of comparison. You know, you'd think the Switch 1 would be, but I actually think the PS4 seems like a very natural point of comparison for the Switch 2. And
this is coming from the same exact YouTube channel, guys, the channel that gives these analysis and reports that are being done and being covered by news sites as saying that they are the, you know, premier deciding factor on what is what for graphics comparisons. Literally, they said the Steam Deck will give you an Xbox Series S type of experience, or can give you an Xbox Series S type of experience. And then they show in the video that they have to dial down settings to PS4 levels basically to do so. But they still say it's Xbox Series S levels of performance. And here they're saying Switch 2 is substantially more powerful than Steam Deck in dock mode, at least. We don't have enough information for all the other stuff, of course. They admit it. But they go ahead and compare it to PlayStation 4. They don't even use the Xbox Series S as even part of the discussion whatsoever here. So I think that is exactly why, you know, people have done videos like this, myself included, because we kind of have to. At least I have to. I feel like I need to, because this kind of stuff doesn't make any sense. And guys like me, when you try to cover Switch 2, you want to have a point of reference that makes more sense than the PS4, because what we're seeing is beyond PS4, and some of the games like Street Fighter 6 look better than Xbox Series S, and the image quality is hands down better than Xbox Series S in a lot of things I've already seen. The DLSS in Switch 2 is absolutely mind-blowing in my opinion. So yeah, we're definitely going to have to call out sites like Digital Foundry here. It's not my forte to do that, and I'm not trying to disrespect them. I'm using their own information to kind of prove my point here, that they said so themselves. This is all their information that they said, not me. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about all this in the comment section. I think this is very interesting stuff, to say the least. I'm definitely interested in it. I like covering tech information. I like to be, you know, as accurate as possible. It interests me. It's what my interest is in gaming, and the tech stuff. It's exciting. I like it. And Nintendo was really getting on the ball here with the tech part of it in the portable sense, and I'm very, very impressed. So let me know what you think. I think it's just fun stuff to talk about. So if you do enjoy this content, please hit the like button and subscribe for more, and I'll talk to you very soon in the next video. Have a great day.